Hey, hello, everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes to let the room fill up to let everybody get in, and we'll probably start in another minute or so. Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Bridget Jones. I co-lead Translational Endeavors for Frontiers CTSI and happy to be hosting our Research and Discovery Grand Rounds today. The next slide. So just give one update before we get started and get to our speaker. Just wanted to put on everyone's radar for our next Research and Discovery Grand Rounds. It will be held Thursday, June 26th, here on Zoom at noon. We'll have Dr. Alexander Norbash, who's the new Dean of the School of Medicine at UMKC School of Medicine. He will talk about his career trajectory and kind of insights into his career and his research. So please mark that on your calendars to join next month. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. John Carlson, who will be talking to us about science communication. I do want to read his bio because he has an interesting background that I think aligns well with the topic today, but overall just an interesting background. So Dr. Carlson obtained his bachelor's degree in entomology from the University of Maryland, and then moved to New Orleans to earn a MD, PhD in parasitology, studying the ecology of wetlands that lead to malaria outbreaks in Kenya. He stayed at Tulane using the integrated research pathway to complete residency in pediatrics. He completed his fellowship in allergy immunology at Tulane and joined the faculty at Tulane in 2010. His research has continued to focus on insect-induced allergies, including cockroach-induced asthma and sting-induced anaphylaxis. However, his clinical work as a junior faculty was on a mobile clinic working to bring health care to children in areas of New Orleans without medical infrastructure due to the 2005 flooding with Hurricane Katrina. Through his community work, he joined the Children's Health Fund and received training in advocacy. He applied the lessons learned to develop a new advocacy rotation in 2013, incorporating the ongoing research in communication science to promote effective advocacy work by pediatricians. In 2013, he also took over the Tulane Ochsner Pediatrics residency as the program director. 2 years ago, the residency program split into the component Tulane and Ochsner, and he's moved full-time to Ochsner. He is the current chair of the Association of Pediatric Program Directors Advocacy Committee, fostering cross-site collaboration in advocacy training, and performs descriptive analyses on public communication by pediatricians. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Carlson to give our presentation for today.
Thank you so very much. Yeah, most of my talks are on insect immune system interactions. So this is definitely a little bit of a side project that I've been doing for many years. Really because of my work in community pediatrics and recognizing that without effective communication, things just didn't work very well. And then progressively, I've been interested in following the research on communication science. It's a huge field. I guess as a disclosure, my older sister and father are both anthropologists. And so I've bounced a lot of this by them to sort of validate this research because it's not research that's generally found in PubMed. There are different journals that house communication science. So I've had to get some assistance in parsing all of that. But it is fascinating. The things that work, some is intuitive, but some is counterintuitive. There's a huge body of research to go over, but I'm really going to focus on just 4 elements that I think are particularly useful for people who are thinking about dipping their toes into communication science and really thinking about how to communicate about your science. And these 4 elements or objectives, number one is going to have to do with emotions. We're going to talk about our feelings a little bit. And then we're going to go over the concept of processing fluency. And finally, going to introduce a concept called epistemic vigilance and what it is and how you can overcome it in your communications. Uh, and then, as sort of a summation, describe the importance of deliberately practicing communication as a skill set. All right. The first element, affect. So affect is the outward signs of an emotion. And affect mirroring is the instinctive response that we all have to match the affect of the person with whom we're interacting. This is automatic. You can't help but look at somebody's facial expression and imagine what they're feeling and then feel that yourself. Now, as pediatricians, we learn how to regulate our emotions. So let's say we have a family coming in and they're really angry about something. Maybe the wait time and to be seen was really long and they're very upset, they're very angry. We will feel that sense of anger that our mirror neurons will activate, but then we can regulate our outward expression of affect. So just because we get angry affect doesn't mean we have to give angry affect. Incidentally, the research on this shows that you can somewhat manipulate other people's emotions by projecting affect at them, and good physicians do this regularly. You probably didn't have the names for it, but you've learned that when somebody comes at you with sort of an angry affect, you're able to spin that around and show care and concern. And that in turn activates the mirror neurons of the person with whom you're interacting. And you can see that they go from being angry to feeling care and concern in return. So that's called affect mirroring. Um, when we talk about how to use this in communication, we have to figure out which of the emotions we want to communicate and the intensity of that emotion that we want to communicate. The research on emotions is kind of all over the place. There isn't one validated list of emotions. Here's one that is sort of in the popular press, so not scientifically validated, but gives a good list of some of the commonly described emotions that you can choose to select from when you are trying to communicate about your science. So this is an honest question that I'll ask all of you to kind of think about, and that is, what emotions do you feel comfortable communicating? As scientists, we're actually taught to suppress a lot of our emotions. Some of the things we do, the anxieties we have about the outcomes of our research, et cetera, we kind of learn to hold those in, to regulate our emotions. That's potentially a good thing. But sometimes we train that up so well that it becomes uncomfortable communicating emotion outwardly. Sometimes we do it, but it's only after we fail to regulate our emotions. So what I'm asking you to do is to think about which emotions, despite your regulation, so you're not having a failure of regulation, which emotion, when regulated, do you feel comfortable talking about or conveying to your audience? This is an honest question because different people feel more comfortable with different emotions. So this is an exercise that's worth going through. And then put it into practice. So this is your homework assignment number 1, is once you've kind of figured out what emotions you feel comfortable expressing, think about how you can incorporate that emotion when you are talking about your research. you will see that if you are delighted, for example, in your research, or you feel a sense of curiosity about the outcomes of a research that you're proposing, if you communicate that curiosity or you communicate delight, if you display that affect, you'll trigger the mirror neurons in your audience, and they will also feel a sense of delight or curiosity. So again, this in some spheres is weaponized, where you want people to feel a certain way and you can be emotionally manipulative. So I'm not suggesting using disingenuous emotion. This is honest emotion that you have about your research when you're communicating it. You will find that people will be much more receptive if their mind is open because of curiosity or delight. Now, the intensity of that emotion, some people are worried about the intensity of communication because they think that if they don't communicate in a very intense way, people won't listen. And so we went on Twitter. This was back before it became X. And we got access to a data set of people identifying themselves as pediatricians using this super cute hashtag of Tweediatrician. This is a hashtag that was actually started for the purpose of science communication and advocacy. And of the 163 people who had that in their bios, so self-identifying as pediatricians engaged in public communication, we took their messages, their public messages that they put out, and we ran them through an analysis called a sentiment analysis. We actually used 3 different programs to analyze the sentiment. And you can see that there was large agreement in these sentiment analyses. And the pediatricians largely felt most comfortable with a neutral affect, so slightly positive or slightly negative. Um, and just to give some examples of what a neutral communication would be, if you enjoyed something, that would give you a score of +1. If you were disappointed in something, that might be a -1. All the way up to if you were overjoyed, that would be a 4, or thrilled, a +5. Negative things would be that was a catastrophic outcome, would be a -4 sentiment. And I can't actually give you the list of -5s because they're all expletives, and I know this is being recorded. But you can fill in the blank there for your -5, and the analysis would basically sum up these emotionally charged terms in the communication to calculate a sentiment score. So most of the communications centered on a neutral sentiment score, but you can see that there really were some outliers. And so you could ask the question, were those outliers of very positive and very negative emotions, did people engage with that more frequently? Did they retweet or repost? Did they engage in comments and likes and the such? And what we found when we got the amount of engagement per post, so each dot here is a post, that the very positive and very negative posts got very little engagement. And these viral tweets out here were by and large centered on 0, so relatively neutral affect, communicating a little bit of emotion. If there was a positive emotion, it was usually balanced by a negative word. I am disappointed in the outcome of this legislative vote, but hopeful that we'll come together to find a solution, would be an example of a balanced neutral sentiment score. So it's not absent of sentiment, but it is a balance of sentiment. I think that this is really encouraging because, again, I think most scientists feel a little bit uncomfortable being outraged or saying that I am just absolutely thrilled by this situation. It feels uncomfortable to go to those extremes of emotional communication, but you don't have to. So you can decide what emotions you feel comfortable when communicating about your science. And then you can communicate that out without going overboard in a positive or negative stance. And people will get engagement. Just one big caveat is that this was an analysis of pediatricians. So this isn't to say that outrage doesn't work for other people. But what people are looking for in their pediatrician specifically, and my guess is physicians generally, or scientists perhaps, is a fairly neutral affect when communicating things. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying if you want to be effective at public communication, these are some clues on what will make you more effective. All right, the next thing to go over is about processing fluency. So the term fluency really has to do with how easily you understand a concept. So language fluency is one example. If you are learning a second language and you practice it more and more, you'll be able to talk more fluently in that language, which will allow somebody to process your communication more easily. So that's processing fluency. So there is research on what leads to processing fluency. So one, it probably isn't surprising, is that your phrases, if they are shorter, will be easier to process. That is so intuitive, right? But it isn't what we generally do when we're communicating about our science, because scientists are always giving lots of nuanced clauses about the limitations of our findings, et cetera. We don't want to be disingenuous. We don't want to be incomplete in our communication. So we tend to use really, really long phrases. This takes practice for sure. How do you condense your research message down into a short phrase? The next that I think is really interesting is that the phrase should be easy to say. If you're bouncing with too many consonants or too many harsh sounds in a word that make it more difficult to say, but if the phrase is a mouthful, as they say, then it won't be processed as easily. The shape of the words, the sound of the words affect how easily the information is processed by the person who's listening. This third point I think is absolutely fascinating. It feels true. Um, there's more research on that, but I think that if you spend some time listening to people communicating, you'll realize that the way in which people talk sometimes makes it feel more true. And sometimes it's kind of a sketchy way that the words come out. And even if it is a true statement, it may not feel right. So there's research on that as well, but it is more of an emotional tone. And so it's worth spending time when you're selecting your phrases for communication. They should be short, they should be easy to say, but then you should also kind of take a step back and say, does that feel true the way that I'm saying it? And then the last point that has been extensively researched is that if your phrase is similar to previously encountered phrases, it will be easier to process. It will be believed more. I could sum up these 4 bullet points more effectively by saying, give the ring of truth instead of proof. So again, short phrases, they're easy to say, they feel true, and the ring of truth is a previously encountered phrase for most of you. So this would be an example of how you would distill down a concept into a phrase that is easier to process. Going into just a slight more detail on this, similar to previously encountered phrases, there's 2 areas of research on this bullet point specifically. One is called the mere exposure effect. So that means that if you have been merely exposed to a message more often, you will believe it to be more true. There's a lot of research in this. So and then the illusory effect is actually when, because you've been exposed to a message multiple times, it makes that message more believable. Whether the message is true or not, it still has an effect. If it is a false statement, it is believed to be true because the message has been repeated. It's called the illusory effect. The research, just to go into some of the methods just quickly, because I think that it helps to kind of bring it home. The classic of these studies, which has been repeated many times, gives a research participant a list of 50 statements, some of which are true, some of which are not true. And the research subject is asked to score on a 5-point Likert scale. Is this statement definitely not true, probably not true, neutral, probably true, or definitely true? And they go through and they rank all 50 statements. They bring that research participant back in a week and they give them a new list. Now, some 25 or so of those questions are repeated from the first list. The rest of them are new. If you saw that statement previously on the first list, you are going to move on the Likert scale from the probably not true to the neutral or probably true on your scores. If you bring them back another week later, and now you give them 25% of the questions are from the first list, 25% of the questions are from the second list that were not duplicated on the first list, 25% of the questions were on the first list and the second list, and 25% of the questions are new. You find it's an additive effect. So the more often you're exposed to a statement, even if it's false, the more believable it becomes. And this is a completely subconscious phenomenon. The subconsciousness was validated by showing images faster than cognition can happen. And it changes people's perceptions um, of what the truth is. So that's the illusory effect. Just bringing it into healthcare, this is probably the scariest of all the studies on the illusory effect. This was in the Public Library of Science, PLS01 paper. They took a bunch of vaccine myths, so things that are definitely not true, and they looked on the CDC's website, where they have a website where it lists what the myth is, and then in plain language, they really do a good job of basically debunking the myth around a vaccine. And so they took those myths, and in the myths versus facts bar on the far left, they simply gave the research participants the information distilled down from the CDC's website. But they did two other interventions as well. One was a visual correction in which they did a diagram, so not text, but a diagram to explain how vaccines work or what side effects are or the links with autism, et cetera. So a diagrammatic depiction. And then the fear correction was an attempt basically to scare people. So they would show pictures of the diseases that the vaccines were designed to prevent. So to invoke fear so that you would want to do the vaccine. And then they had a control. And you can see 1 week later after the correction, they brought them back. And you can see that really the control group didn't change, the fear correction group didn't change, the visual correction didn't really change statistically, if anything, believed more in the myths a little bit later. But this was a statistical difference. So people were more likely to believe in the myth when they got a factual correction on the myth. And this is believed to be that mere exposure effect. The fact that they resaw the myth reinforced the myth. Even though it was debunked, the debunking wasn't fluent. There was no processing fluency in that message in the way that like vaccines cause autism. It's easy to say, it's short, it's something you've heard before. So it reinforced that idea, that connection. Based on this concern, now in terms of public messaging, specifically around vaccines, we know that we cannot directly confront misinformation, that directly confronting misinformation on the public in public communication is likely to backfire. And so you may now hear certain groups like the American Academy of Pediatrics will use alternate phrasing, such as vaccines save lives. It's a short phrase, it's punchy, it sounds believable, and if we all keep saying it, we will get that mere exposure effect on that. Now, this isn't to say you shouldn't confront vaccine misinformation on an individual basis, but there are different techniques that you can use in dialogue that isn't available in public communication. And again, many other examples of this mere exposure effect. And I think probably for most folks, if you really think about some of the misinformation that's out there, you'll realize that one of the reasons why people believe this is because the same misinformation is said over and over and over again through multiple venues. All right. Moving on, and this is much more helpful with dialogue, but can also be used for public science communication, is addressing epistemic vigilance. So epistemic vigilance is the reason why you don't just accept everything that you've been told. Because you hear information, sometimes you're like, huh, I don't know about that. For whatever reason, it's sticking. It's conflicting with something that maybe I believe already. There's a belief already in my mind. And now you're kind of wondering, well, is it true? How do I assess this new information? So again, it's a good thing that people have epistemic vigilance, because if you didn't, you would just accept everything that comes your way. It's frustrating when you're trying to communicate, but boy, it's actually nice that other people are going to at least question some of the information coming to them, knowing that there are a lot of bad actors out there that are, really, they've got a lot of personal gain for tricking people. So just giving information, just saying like, this is my science, these are the results. Sometimes, like if I'm doing research on cytokines, you probably don't have a lot of pre-existing beliefs on cytokines, and you may just accept it. But if I'm telling you something that may not sit 100% comfortably in your mind because you have a pre-existing belief, you're going to go through a subconscious assessment of what I'm telling you. And it's mapped out. These are sequential questions that happen subconsciously very, very quickly when you get new information. The first is, are they an expert? Is the person who's saying this thing that isn't quite leaning 100% right, are they trustable? Like, what is it about them that makes them specifically knowledgeable at this in this area? And so as a scientist, my recommendation is to lean on your expertise. Wear your lab coat or your white coat if you're a physician. Use the doctor title or whatever your credentials are behind your name. Use your institutional affiliations. These actually matter a lot. Now, it feels awkward sometimes. It feels a little pretentious or stuffy when you are saying like, I'm an expert, you should all listen to me. It feels weird to do, but the research shows that evaluation of expertise is really important. Um, I'm going to make a little digression there just because I think the reason why I want to hit this hard is that people are not doing this. My group got together and ransacked a database that has op-eds of really every newspaper article published around the country. And we did a search for terms of pediatricians in there and got 249 op-eds over a 12-month period, two matched time periods, 6-month time periods before COVID came out, and then not including the first 6 months of COVID, but the next 6 months of COVID after things had begun to die down a little bit. And one of the things we assessed was, do they list an academic affiliation? Do they list a non-academic affiliation? And only about half of the pediatricians listed what their employer was. Now, it's not that hard to figure out what people's real employers are, even if you don't list your affiliation, your employment. So we did quick Google searches on them and found that, in fact, half of the people who didn't list an affiliation, about half were coming from academia and half not. But this is just one example of people not using the credibility of their expertise in overcoming epistemic vigilance. I recognize that, when you're speaking publicly, there is a fine line, because if you use your affiliations, you are in part speaking on behalf of the institution that employs you. And if you say something that's potentially I don't know, controversial or something like that, it could come down on your employer, and that way, it could come down on you. But if it's about your science and you're just saying what you did and what the outcomes were, and maybe you're using some emotion about it, but like you're not saying anything that's factually inaccurate, sure, you'll get some blowback. But it's probably worth, like, you're gonna get the blowback anyway. I think it's probably worth talking that through with your employer. And again, stick to what your science actually shows. But I think it's worth using that affiliation, because we know that first question that will subconsciously be assessed anytime new information doesn't hit 100% comfortably in your audience's mind is, are they an expert? The next thing to focus on is, are they trying to trick me? And you've definitely seen this, just sticking with the vaccine stuff. Pediatricians or physicians in general are getting kickbacks from, vaccine manufacturers. Like, this is clearly not true, but this is why they're doing it, is they're trying to say those pediatricians are tricking you. Because that is the second subconscious element that happens when you're assessing information. Oh, okay, maybe they're an expert, but they've got some conflict of interest there. So that's the next one. There are ways of getting around this as well, and that is basically saying why you care. So if you will permit me another digression, I'm going to talk about how to show people why you care. Um, this research in cognitive psychology has just exploded in the last 10 years. And most of the research going on now uses these functional MRIs, where whatever emotion they're studying, they will have people experience it while undergoing an fMRI scan. And you can actually physically see where the neural networks are that are lining up. And then you can bring them out of the scanner. You can do some intervention. You can put them back in the scanner and see if you get changes and how the brain lights up. And in this way, we've been able to map out different neural networks in the brain. So all of it's fascinating, but specific for science communication, this is a series of neural networks that I think are really, really useful, helpful for me to know explicitly what I'm doing when I'm talking to people. These are the neural networks that I'm trying to hit. The first one is the salience network. The salience network, depicted on this fMRI here, is the part of your brain that determines what you should focus on. So right now, I don't know how many of you are, maybe on Instagram or whatever. Oh, but I called you out on it. So suddenly your salience network is lighting up like, oh, I got called out on something. So your salience network is going to direct your focus to what I'm saying if you were on Instagram. Or maybe what I'm saying is just really compelling. And so your salience network is like, yeah, let's focus in. But maybe, I don't know, you've got an urgent page and you got to return it for patient care. Your salience network has made that judgment. It's better to focus on whatever that other task is. And I get it. So for anyone not paying attention like that, it's totally fine, totally fine. Your salience network, I trust your salience network. So if the salience network activates and recognizes suffering and decides to focus on the suffering, it sends a message like, okay, shut everything else off, and we are going to trigger the temporal parietal junction. So the temporal parietal junction is the fascinating part of the human brain involved in perspective taking. So you literally imagine yourself to be in the position of whoever's suffering. So if I'm telling you about a patient that I'm advocating for, or a medical condition that's a problem, and we're trying to do science to solve that problem, and I tell you a story, the salience network will detect that there might be some suffering, a bad thing is happening. And that'll send a signal to your temporal parietal junction. Imagine what it would be like to be that patient, or be that family member, or be the doctor taking care of them, or to be the scientist doing the research on this, or whatever it is. They will take on the perspective of whoever is suffering. The temporal parietal junction then sends messages to the insula. The insula is the part of the brain that experiences somatic sensation. So if I like came up and I don't know, hit your thumb with the hammer, it is your insula that tells you which thumb hurts. It is where in your brain pain or any sensation is experienced. But the temporal parietal junction also can trigger the insula. So if I'm not going to do this, but if I on camera took my thumb and hit it with a hammer, your temporal parietal junction would send a signal to your insula. Imagine what it would be like if you hit your thumb with a hammer, and you would feel the pain. It's real pain. The research shows that if you pre-treat with acetaminophen, you will not experience that empathic pain. Isn't that fascinating? So empathic pain is real pain. You can train yourself up or down, so you can dull your empathic pain. You can train yourself to heighten it if you want to. So there's all of these neural networks are trainable, is what the fMRI studies show. Your salience network can get better at recognizing suffering or shutting down the recognition of suffering. Temporal parietal junction can get better at perspective taking or worse at perspective taking, and you can feel that empathic pain higher or lower through training. But if you train it up, one of the things that you can do after launching the insular pain is the prosocial network. So it's a separate neural network in the brain that wants to respond to suffering. So it's other focus. It's like, oh no, I felt the pain, but now I know that that was your pain that I just felt, and I want to relieve your suffering. And so I'm going to do something to alleviate that suffering. Now, the research shows that this can happen all in your imagination. That's where this all takes place, is in your brain. And so what you're trying to do when you're advocating for research funding for science generally, or access to medical care, or whatever it is, where somebody is like, well, I'm worried about the vaccines causing these problems or whatever, you can tell a story of somebody who may have been harmed, by the disease itself. You can talk about what that felt like, get their temporal parietal junction and their insula fired up. And then you can lead them in a pro-social response. You can say, I know that as a society, we can do better than this. We can invest in vaccines. We can invest in public health. We can invest in overcoming barriers to healthcare. And with that, we can prevent all of these problems from happening. In the research literature, if you have successfully engaged this pro-social network, it leads to a sensation that in the research they call warm glow. And I'm like, couldn't you have said that in Latin? It would sound so much, I don't know, more scientific. But we've all felt that, right? When you've helped somebody, when you've alleviated suffering in some way, that warm glow, it's a good feeling. And so that is where you're trying to get people to end up. Now, this is really important. You do not want to leave people stuck in empathic distress, because one of the pathways out of empathic distress, other than the pro-social network, is blaming the victim for their own suffering. And you know that's a really common thing. Like, let's blame people who are impoverished for their own poverty. Let's blame people who are sick for being sick in the first place. The reason why that's so common is that that is a neural network. That is an escape from empathic distress that we all have in our brains, and you can train it up. Don't train it up in the people you're talking to. Train up the pro-social response. What is the solution to the problem? And have them, you don't have to have actually achieved it. You only have to imagine what the world would look like if things got better. So super, super important. Do not leave people in empathic distress when you're doing these stories. Now, if you bring them all the way through to the warm glow, they now know that you're not trying to trick them. So remember, that was that second point that we're addressing. Are they trying to trick me? Oh, you're going to make money off of this. You've got a conflict of interest. And maybe you do, right? So if you're a researcher, part of your salary probably does come from research funds. And so you're advocating in part for yourself. So fine, maybe have a slight financial conflict of interest. But if you go through the storytelling of, this was the problem, this was the solution, this is what we did about it, this is what we found, this is the better world we can walk into, this is why I care. You've led them through that compassion cycle, each of those neural networks in sequence, and now they know why you care. Again, the research shows you can fake this to some degree. It's not as good when you're faking it, but some people get good at faking these sorts of things. They're being emotionally manipulative. My recommendation is don't do that. It's not good for you and it's dishonest, so don't fake things. But once you practice it, you will get better. It's super. When I started doing this, I was so awkward, so incredibly, incredibly awkward. As you practice storytelling around why you're doing the research you're doing and why the results of your research matters, you will get better at it, and you will see it land more and more effectively. The last of the questions in epistemic vigilance. So one, are they an expert? So hopefully you all can introduce yourself and why you're an expert. Number two, are they trying to trick me? So hopefully you're all now armed. Think about stories. Like, what is it? Why do you care? Show them that. The last is, does what they say align with my trusted sources? And so maybe it doesn't, right? So maybe one of their trusted sources is a major source of misinformation. That isn't to say, like, not one of us believes any source 100% of the time. So you may not get this one. This may be the one that you're using point one and point two to overcome. So there isn't always a lot you can do about that. There are advanced techniques, and I'll refer you to a book if you're interested in addressing that point. But that really is an advanced technique and best done through dialogue, and is a completely separate set of skills that would need to be practiced. And so another homework that I'll assign all of you is to figure out how you would introduce yourself to folks and why you care about your research. So you're thinking about what emotions you're comfortable communicating about, and then also the compassion cycle. What is the problem you're trying to address? How do you communicate it in a way that addresses the suffering that you're trying to alleviate? Show why your research matters, lead them through to the point of solving, even in the imagination, the projected future. What would it mean? How will we alleviate suffering? That show them, activate their pro-social network. Practice doing that, and you will get better at it. All right, so we figured out about setting that emotional tone for affect mirroring, and you're going to think about your emotions there. You're going to think about ways of phrasing your research and what you do in a way that enhances your processing fluency for your audience. You now are armed with the techniques for addressing epistemic vigilance. And then the last bit that is, it's not new research, but it's ongoing, really well-established research, is that the more you practice any skill, the better you get at it. So to talk quickly about why this matters, there's research on how information cascades through groups of people. So this would be the classic is going viral. Why does something go viral? Why does an idea suddenly sweep across society seemingly overnight? Like, why are there these big shifts in our perspectives? So there's terminology that I'll introduce you to. So in any social group, maybe it's us here, researchers that have zoomed in today. Maybe one person has an idea that's contrary to the mainstream ideas in our group. That innovator will communicate with others in the group, and they will assess through epistemic vigilance and the other things that we talked about the veracity of this new concept, this new belief, this new idea. Interestingly, you don't always have to hit the person that you're directly talking to. There are a few studies that show that the larger effects are called the next nearest neighbor effects. So, I'm talking to Dr. Jones about, why insect allergy is the most interesting thing ever. And she doesn't buy it. She's like, no, it's just not that interesting. I much prefer asthma research or something like that. And she goes to somebody else later and like, man, that John Carlson, ridiculous. He thinks that insect allergy research is all that's the most important. Can you believe that guy? Whoever she's talking to will reassess the message that she's providing. Insect allergy is important. Huh. And if they've heard it from other next nearest neighbor effects as well, they may be convinced that insect allergy is the most important and interesting kind of allergy out there, even though Dr. Jones herself did not believe it. So communication works through these next nearest neighbor cascades. And so as you begin getting people within they call it a node, a social node, as more and more people flip over, there's more and more communication happening that align with that particular belief or concept. And ultimately, you will suddenly get, through the mere frequency effect, you will suddenly get a lot of people changing their minds all at once because the sheer frequency of communication has gone up. Now, in any group that flips suddenly, there will be a group of people that are referred to as the holdouts. So the mainstreamers are the people that suddenly move a concept through to basically penetrate the entirety of a node, or with exception of the holdouts. The holdouts, it turns out, are also a really interesting group. These aren't people necessarily that have got delusional beliefs or are just really ornery or anything like that. It's probably that they are members of other nodes, like this one here, that simply are communicating an alternate belief. That makes the holdouts going, even though everyone else except for these handful already are on board with the new concept, the new model, the new belief. If you are able to change a holdout, they will become the innovator in the next social node. So this is called social percolation, this spinning of ideas as it moves through groups of people. So the units are groups of people. Each person is a member of multiple groups. And it is through this cascade that suddenly you can have society-wide change that seems like it happens very, very quickly. The number one variable that determines whether a node is going to switch is the frequency of communication. When the mere frequency effect happens to you, it's a subconscious effect. This has been studied. So you didn't believe it, you didn't believe it, you didn't believe it, you didn't believe it. Okay, maybe. Oh yeah, now I believe it. The surveyor comes and asks you, have you always believed this? And your answer will be, yes, of course I've always believed it. So we have a retrospective amnesia about the changing of our beliefs. This is really interesting to me because I feel like I'm pretty much set in stone, that I don't change my beliefs that often. But the research suggests that actually I've changed my beliefs a lot and simply don't remember it. That's just fascinating. Anyway, one of the misconceptions, the myths out there is that, oh, people just aren't listening. You can't change people's minds. The research says it's just communication frequency. That is the number one variable. If you practice it, you'll get better at it. And with each practice, not only will you get better at it, but you still engage in the mirror frequency effect, even if you didn't do it well, even if your message fluency was pretty poor, you still engaged in the mirror frequency effect. So long story short, more communication is better. And these are the different groups that we've studied that have shown that communication works at changing people's minds and ultimately leading to system level change. Often in advocacy, people focus on legislative advocacy, but certainly we have really profound examples from all of these other bulleted groups. And again, you just start practicing. You pick something that's kind of interesting to you and you start working away on it. You practice it and you don't judge yourself like, am I good now? It's a skill set. Of course, you're not good now. Maybe you are. I don't mean to judge you. The question you should be asking yourself is, do you want to get good at it? And if you set yourself to this deliberative practice, you will get good at it. I mean, I'm old now, so I've known people who started off really being pretty shoddy communicators, and eventually that got good. And certainly that is my story as well. When I first started learning about this, I was a horrible public communicator. I mean, I offended a lot of the people that I was advocating with. And I got specific training. That's how bad I was, is that I had to be specifically trained in communication for advocacy. And through that, I can see that I got better and better and better. I still have a lot of room for improvement, obviously, but that's it. It's deliberative practice that makes you good at any skill set that you want to get good at. With that, here are 3 books that are strong recommendations. So as the science has progressed, I mean, there's huge bodies of literature. It's difficult to understand a lot of it because it's outside of the areas of science that I do. And I imagine if you are in health science research, it may be outside of the area that you do. The oldest of these books is Grit by Angela Duckworth. But it is still relevant, particularly in encouraging you to engage in deliberative practice and recognizing why you want to do what you want to do. So that it's an easy read, it's super quick. If you haven't read it before, or even if you have read it before, it's probably worth a read. It won't take you that long. Much more recent is How Minds Change. So David Rainey, really interesting guy. He actually ran a podcast basically trying to humiliate people who had believed in conspiracy theories and other myths. And it was his initial contention that minds didn't change, that you couldn't convince people to change their perspective. And then when he started to write this book, it completely changed his mind on whether minds could change. And so he goes through he talks to the scientists doing this research that shows that, in fact, people's minds do change. So really, really good science communication there. Most recently, David Robson, all of his books, he's got 3 really fantastic books. But the most relevant to this is called Intelligence Trap, in which if you think that people buy into conspiracy theories or won't believe you, if you believe that the reason is because they're stupid, you are wrong. That research says you are wrong. They are actually quite intelligent. It's these other forces that keep beliefs entrenched. And knowing why things are entrenched, he also explores what you can do about that. So all 3 of these really, really great There's so many more great books, but this is excellent examples of science communication on science communication. All right, so I'm going to end there. This is my last slide, really just kind of re-emphasizing that these are things that we can all do. We can all reflect on what emotions we feel are useful in communicating our science. And it's an honest question. How do you feel when you communicate delight or curiosity or concern or worry about your patients or the well-being of society? What are those elements of emotion that you feel good projecting through your affect, that you feel comfortable with? And then practice that, just practice it. And then practice selecting phrases for processing fluency. Come up with your research, bundle it a bunch of different ways. Don't stop at the first solution you get that seems to be short and pithy. Come up with different things. Try them out over lunch with one of your colleagues. Say, like, let me put this one by you. How do you feel when I say this? Just give it a try. Start making this a part of the dialogues that you engage in. And then really look at these areas of epistemic vigilance. Recognize that there's a reason why your information isn't sinking in. The information deficit model generally doesn't work and can backfire because you are engaging in the mere frequency effect if it's misinformation that you're repeating. So know why they aren't believing you, and then you now know how to address that epistemic vigilance. And then lastly, do practice it. The practicing makes you better and engages in the mere frequency effect on the things that you care about. And with that, I'll open up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Carlson. That was wonderful. That was a really great presentation. I think touched on so many things that we never think about in how we communicate our science. So lots and lots of good information there. So I do see we have one question in the chat. So if others want to put questions in the chat, or you can also come off of mute if you want to and ask your question. But our first question is, how can we express meaningful emotion in scientific writing, such as manuscripts submitted for peer review, where complete objectivity is valued?
Great question. And that's true. Like, as a peer reviewer myself, like, if I see a lot of emotion in a manuscript that I'm peer reviewing, I'm like, is that warranted? Um, as scientists, we are trained to overcome a lot of our affect. Not all of it. Sometimes still, if something conflicts with an existing belief that you have, it'll be hard for you to accept it as a scientist. But we are trained to question the validity of the information that we already know. So that's really not in the manuscripts you write for scientific peer review. That's probably not where you need to practice inserting emotion. You can, but it's not going to escape peer review unless it's really subtle. Instead, after you get that manuscript published, how do you communicate out to the public, not other scientists, but out to the public about the value of your work? That's where I highly recommend practicing, either verbally when you're talking to community groups or other professional groups. If I'm at a national meeting, I now try to, and I'm talking about research that I've done, I try to explain why I care about what I've done. When you're writing op-eds about your research, when you're talking to elected officials about your research or the value of this line of inquiry, this is where you this is where it's much more valuable to practice inserting your emotion. Social media.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Maria?
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. And I'm wondering about the three sort of steps that you provided at the end there as part of addressing epistemic vigilance and that intersection of trust and expertise. And this is something I study too, but not as much as you have. So I'm curious about how you think lived experience can intersect with that. So many of us are both either working with clinical populations that we don't have all the same shared identities of course, and then also researching those populations. And so um, are there ways to think about how either sharing information from others with the lived experience of the phenomenon we're discussing, or partnering with those folks that you think or have seen to be most effective?
Absolutely. So the Trusted Messengers project with the COVID vaccine really had some stunning successes, and that was it. You find somebody within a community who is interested in dialoguing with you, and then you engage in dialogue with them, the people who have that lived experience and are a trusted messenger within the community. If people don't know you, they'll still look at your expertise. Okay, so that is still valid in the processing fluency of your messages. All of that is still 100% valid. But a major way of overcoming that barrier of just trust, and this is innate in every community, is to distrust people that you don't know. That's a part of the human mind. In some communities, there's more reasons for mistrust than for others. And so getting partnerships with trusted members of that community is a great way of helping to spread a message through a group of people. And doing that, it's usually dialogue that helps with that trusted messenger, because that trusted messenger also may be a little skeptical of what you have to say. It's all the same issues, but it's hard to have dialogue with, thousands of people. Easier to have dialogue with a handful of people where you have a meaningful exchange. Again, if you're going to go that route, definitely it's a different skill set. Dialogue skills are different from what I reviewed here, but there's really great research on it, and some of it is addressed, particularly that How Minds Change book.
Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hey, I think we have another question, Jack.
Looks like you're still muted, Jack.
Oh, yeah, you're muted.
Darn it, I hit the thing, but I guess it wasn't ready.
It happened.
Thank you. Very good talk. I was wondering about how you jive what you said about trust and expertise with what I feel like has been a crumbling of trust and expertise in a lot of ways in general media.
Yeah, so what we're contending with is this is really challenging. This is an incredibly difficult time. So we are having problems with the illusory effect, the mere frequency effect, where misinformation is reported over and over and over and over again, and now is being repeated by people who technically have impressive looking credentials that show that they may have some measure of expertise. So we are absolutely living through really difficult times for science and science communication, and there's no doubt about that. Just a quick reminder that directly confronting misinformation is going to backfire. Just because somebody has unearned credibility in a general audience doesn't mean that you don't have credibility. And so taking an example of the American Academy of Pediatrics launching this effective campaign on vaccines save lives, what you see in the media are sort of the polar extremes. And that absolutely the mere frequency effect, it's harmful. It's very harmful. But when we communicate out that vaccines save lives, or the value of research that we do, or why this all matters, people do listen to us. And in the end, when you have two different sources of information and you're assessing the credibility of these two, vaccines cause autism and side effects and things like that, vaccines save lives, the individual then has to really weigh this out. And I think you'd be surprised at how intelligent people are. Particularly if you use all the techniques of showing why you care, that you're not trying to be manipulative, and whatever it is for your area of science, it's remarkably effective. So again, don't expect that the media types that make their money off of polarization, don't expect that that's going to make front page news there. But on the other hand, the way that society operates, these social nodes, the communication you do within your nodes, the spheres of influence that you do have, it really does matter. We're going to get through this.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So we have 1 minute left. I was gonna let Janelle, did you want to ask your question here?
Oh, I think Dr. Carlson pretty much answered it on the trust and expertise and the title, but there are some communities, and you've kind of glanced on it, that are very cautious with these, people in authority. And I think Jack just touched on too, this whole pushback to authority at all, or expertise, or, anybody who has a blog or a radio show can claim expert now.
Yes, it's true. But again, like, people have definitely started to confuse online experiences with the real world. So that is absolutely a problem. And I'm not trying to diminish that. I'm not trying to diminish the sheer magnitude of harm that's coming to the scientific enterprise, that's coming to society. I mean, like it's really, 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 really bad. The Intelligence Trap book, and just communicating with the author a little bit, is people are not that stupid. Like people are actually really pretty smart, and they're caught up in emotions and beliefs and all the rest of that, but they're not stuck there. They really aren't stuck. It's every community that is suspicious. It's part of the human mind is to form communities, and within those communities to be suspicious of outsiders. But we as a population, the world is smarter than it ever has been before. And the Intelligence Trap actually argues that that's part of the reason why we're in the predicaments that we are now, is that the intelligence actually isn't that great for society. So it's a fascinating read. But that it really also gives you hope that these are smart people, and people do change their minds, and they can grapple with these things. So I feel good about doing my part in communicating within the spheres that I have. And again, the research shows that it really has an effect. There is an influence that you have. So I, again, will just encourage you all with these caveats that it's real, like all of the bad things are absolutely real. The difficulties and challenges are real, but to think about the ways in which you also can communicate out to the groups that you have access to.
Thank you. So that is a great end to our session. We really appreciate your presentation today, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you all very much.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.